There is a kind of song that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a big intro or a drum fill or a key change designed to tell you how to feel. It just starts. And somewhere between the first word and the second, it reaches into your chest and takes hold of something you forgot was in there. Country music has always had that kind of song. The kind that sneaks up on a person. The kind you're halfway through before you realize you've stopped breathing. But there is a specific corner of country music, quieter than most people remember, more powerful than most people give it credit for, where the great legends of this music set down their honky-tonk anthems and their heartbreak ballads and picked up something different altogether. Something older than Nashville, older than the Grand Ole Opry, older than the radio, gospel music. And when country's greatest voices sang those songs, not as performers, not as recording contracts, but as believers. What came out of them was something that no amount of studio production could manufacture. You either had it or you didn't. Every single person on this list had it. We start with Johnny Cash, because you almost always have to start with Johnny Cash when you're talking about the place where country music and the sacred meet. Here's something that most people don't fully reckon with when they talk about Cash. Gospel music wasn't a side project for him. It wasn't the chapter in the biography that comes after the addiction and before the redemption. It was a thread that ran straight through everything, from the very beginning to the very end. When Cash walked into Sun Records in Memphis in 1954 to audition for Sam Phillips, he didn't come in trying to play rockabilly. He came in with a gospel group. He wanted to make sacred music. That was his first love and his first request. Sam Phillips told him there was no market for gospel records and sent him back to rethink it. Cash rethought it. He gave Phillips Cry, Cry, Cry and Folsom Prison Blues, and the rest is the history everybody knows. But the gospel never left. It was always underneath, running like groundwater under everything else he made. When Cash finally got to Columbia Records, one of his first moves was to record Hymns by Johnny Cash in 1959. He had been waiting for years to make that album. He made it like a man paying a debt he'd been carrying too long. But the moment, the specific moment, that showed the world exactly who Johnny Cash was when it came to sacred music happened inside a prison. February of 1969, San Quentin State Prison, California. Cash had already done Folsom Prison the year before, and the album from that night had changed his career. Now he was back. Different prison, same mission. Early in that San Quentin concert, Cash is raw and loose. He's joking with the inmates about his own jailhouse stints and his drug use. He's the bad man that all came to see. And then, without announcement, without ceremony, he shifts. Midway through the set, he and June and the Carter family begin There'll Be Peace in the Valley. The room changes. These were some of the hardest men in the California prison system, men who had done things that put them behind those walls for years, sometimes forever, and they went quiet. The expressions on their faces, recorded by the film crew that was there, were not the faces of men watching a performance. They were the faces of men who recognized something. Cash sang that song to those men not as entertainment. He sang it as a promise, as something he himself was still reaching toward. That's what made it land the way it did. He wasn't above them. He was right there beside them. A man who had been lost and was still, every single day, trying to find his way back. That is what gospel sounds like when it's real. Dolly Parton grew up the granddaughter of a Pentecostal preacher in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. The fourth of 12 children in a house that didn't have much, in a county that had less. Church wasn't something her family attended. It was a center of gravity around which everything else moved. The music she first learned was church music. The stories she first heard were Bible stories. Her grandfather, Reverend Jake Owens, preached in a small church, and Dolly sang in it from the time she was old enough to stand at the front and open her mouth. All of that, every bit of it, is inside Coat of Many Colors. Now, some people hear that song and think of it as a childhood memory song, a sweet, nostalgic piece about a little girl and her mother's love. And it is that, but if you listen to what's actually in it, you understand that this song is a sermon in disguise. When Dolly's mother sat sewing together scraps and rags to make her daughter a coat, because that was all she had, rags, she told Dolly the story of Joseph from the book of Genesis, the coat of many colors. The boy who was mocked and rejected by his brothers and sold into slavery, who rose to become the most powerful man in Egypt because God's hand was on him. She wasn't just making a coat. She was giving her daughter a theology to survive on. The children at school laughed at Dolly's patchwork coat and called it a bunch of old rags sewn together. And Dolly stood there and told them it was like the coat of many colors in the Bible. They kept laughing. But Dolly went home and wrote the song. And decades later, when she performed it at her induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame, she could barely get through it. Not because of nerves, because the memory of her mother's hands. A poor woman turning someone else's discarded cloth into something sacred for her child. That was still in the room with her. Parton has said many times that Coat of Many Colors is her favorite song she's ever written. Not I Will Always Love You. Not Jolene. This one. Because this one is the whole story. Poverty and faith and a mother's love and a Bible story and a little girl who decided that what her mama told her was worth more than what the world laughed at. That is the gospel, right there in 3.5 minutes of country music. In 1969, Merle Haggard released a song called Hungry Eyes. On the surface, it is a song about his mother, about watching her age and struggle and hold together a family that didn't have enough of anything: money, food, certainty. It's one of the most quietly devastating pieces of songwriting in the entire country music catalog. But underneath the surface, it is a song about faith. Not faith as a declaration. Faith as the only thing a person has left when everything else is gone. Haggard's father died when Merle was 9 years old. His mother, Flossie, was left alone with children to raise and not enough to raise them on. They moved, they scraped, they did what people did. Haggard later said he carried the title Hungry Eyes in his head for 2 years before he knew what to do with it. When he finally wrote the song, he said it not in his own family's story exactly, but in the broader story of an entire generation. The Okies, the Dust Bowl families, the people who came to California with nothing and built something out of sheer refusal to quit. The line that matters most, the one that makes this a gospel song, whether or not it announces itself as one, is about his mother's faith being strong while his father dreamed of something better. That pairing, the dream and the faith, one reaching forward and one reaching upward. Together, they held that family together inside a canvas-covered cabin in a labor camp. There is a reason Haggard said that the best songs feel like they've always been here. Hungry Eyes feels like it was written the morning after the flood, like it has always existed, waiting for someone with the right kind of sorrow in him to finally write it down. Willie Nelson wrote Family Bible when he was in his mid-20s and broke enough that he sold the song for $50 to a man named Paul Buskirk, who placed it with a singer named Claude Gray. Claude Gray recorded it. It went to number 7 on the country charts in 1960, and Willie Nelson didn't get a cent of it. For years, people would come up to Willie and tell him how much they loved Family Bible, not knowing he wrote it. He'd smile and say, "Thank you." He eventually got to record it himself, first on Yesterday's Wine in 1971 and then on the full gospel album Family Bible in 1980. He played it with just his guitar and his sister Bobby on piano. No band, no production, just the two of them and a song about a kitchen table and a worn-out Bible and a family bowing their heads together before the day began. The image at the center of that song is so specific, it almost hurts. The family gathered around the table, the pages worn thin by hands that reached for it every morning, the voices that sang those old hymns before the world got its hands on the day. Willie has talked about his grandmother raising him and his sister in Abbott, Texas. She was a deeply religious woman, and that kitchen table, that Bible, that ritual of starting the day in prayer, that was the foundation of everything he grew up on. He sold the song for $50 because he needed to eat, but he never stopped singing it, because some things aren't really yours to sell. Loretta Lynn came from a place called Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. And if you've never been to that part of the country, the eastern Kentucky coalfields, deep Appalachian hollows where the mountains close in on all sides, you need to understand that the church was not just where people went on Sunday. It was the only public institution most of those communities had. The school, the social gathering, the grief counseling, the place where you brought your dead and your newborns and your marriages, all of it happened in the church. Loretta grew up soaked in that. When she recorded Wings Upon Your Horns and Who Says God Is Dead and Would You Lay With Me, and yes, she was controversial, and yes, Nashville tried to keep a lid on her, she was also recording hymns. Because for Loretta Lynn, there was no contradiction between the raw honesty of her secular songs and the faith underneath them. They came from the same place. But the song that sits at the center of her gospel legacy, the one that her audience of a certain generation connects to most deeply, is Where No One Stands Alone. She performed it at a Grand Ole Opry gospel special. And when she sang that hymn, it wasn't performance. It was testimony. You could hear in her voice every coal camp funeral she'd ever attended, every hard winter, every child she'd worried over, every moment when the only thing between her and the bottom was the faith her people had handed her like an inheritance. Loretta Lynn is a woman who survived things, real things. And when she sang gospel, it was always in that voice, the voice of someone who has needed every word of it to be true. Now, there are gospel songs that country legends recorded in a studio, carefully arranged with time to get the notes right. And those are fine. Some of them are beautiful. And then there is the other kind. The kind that happens in a moment that wasn't planned, when a singer opens their mouth and what comes out is so far beyond what any arrangement could have prepared for that. The engineers in the booth look at each other and don't say a word, because they know they just recorded something that cannot be repeated. That is what happened with George Jones and He Stopped Loving Her Today. That is what happened with Tammy Wynette and Stand By Your Man. But the gospel version of that story is what happened when Tammy recorded Take Me to Your World. Tammy Wynette grew up the daughter of a sharecropper in Mississippi. She picked cotton as a child. She worked her way through beauty school. She buried herself in the church every chance she got because the church was the one place where nobody judged what your daddy owned or didn't own. When Tammy sang anything, gospel or otherwise, she sang with the kind of physical effort that people from hard backgrounds sing with, like she was putting her whole body into it because she needed it to carry. Till I Can Make It on My Own, DIVORCE, Stand By Your Man. These are the songs people remember, but Tammy Wynette's gospel recordings, particularly He Loves Me All the Way and the hymns she recorded toward the end of her career, carry something her pop recordings sometimes didn't. They carry surrender, not weakness, surrender. The specific sound of a person setting down what they've been carrying and placing it somewhere larger than themselves. That is one of the hardest sounds to make. Most people can't do it. Tammy could do it in her sleep. Let's talk for a moment about what gospel music actually did for country music as a genre. Because this isn't just a sentimental conversation about faith. This is about sound. Gospel music gave country music its emotional ceiling. Before gospel, country music could be plaintive. It could be lonesome. It could be tough and be lonesome. It could be tough and resigned and funny and heartbroken. What gospel added was transcendence, the ability to reach up past the personal and arrive at something universal, something that belonged to everyone in the room, not just the singer. When Hank Williams sang I Saw the Light, he was singing a gospel song, and it is significant that this is the song he's perhaps most closely associated with alongside I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. Because together, those two songs tell you everything about Hank Williams. The darkness and the reaching toward the light, both real, both fully inhabited. I Saw the Light is a song about conversion, about the moment when the fog clears and you understand where you've been and where you need to go. Hank Williams wrote it after he got baptized in the early 1940s. He was not a man who held his faith at arm's length or dressed it up in respectable language. He believed it or he didn't. On the nights he was good, he believed it all the way. On the nights he wasn't good, which were many, he still believed it. He just couldn't live up to it. And that gap between the believing and the living is what made Hank Williams the writer he was. He didn't write from safety. He wrote from inside the struggle. I Saw the Light is a song he sang when the light was real to him. I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry is a song he sang when he couldn't find it. Between those two songs, he told the whole story of a man's soul. There is a moment in Randy Travis's recording of 3 Wooden Crosses that a lot of people miss the first time they hear it. And it's not a musical moment. It's a narrative one. The song builds through 3 characters, a farmer, a teacher, a hooker, all on a bus that crashes on a highway. 3 of the 4 people on that bus die. The only survivor is the woman the respectable world would have crossed the street to avoid. And before the farmer dies, he presses his Bible into her hands. She eventually gives that Bible to her son. Her son becomes a preacher, and that preacher stands in a pulpit one Sunday and tells the congregation the story of how he came to hold that word. Passed down through blood and wreckage and a woman nobody would have expected to carry it. That is not a country song. That is a parable, written in the exact tradition of the parables in the Gospels. An unlikely character, a reversal of expectations, grace arriving through the most improbable hands. Randy Travis was born again in his faith later in his life, after his own years of struggle and personal darkness. But when he recorded 3 Wooden Crosses in 2002, his voice had a gravity to it that came from a man who understood personally what it feels like to be the person you didn't expect to be. He won the Grammy for Best Country Song, that year. He went to the podium, and thank God. That is not a publicity move when Randy Travis does it. Randy Travis does not do publicity moves. He says what he means, or he doesn't say anything. Here's the thing that connects all of these songs, every single one of them. They are not songs about religion, they are songs about need. Johnny Cash singing to prisoners wasn't performing piety. He was one broken man looking at a room full of broken men and saying, I know this song. I know what it costs, and I believe it anyway. Dolly Parton singing about her mother's coat wasn't making a faith statement. She was pulling back the curtain on a childhood where the Bible was the only wealth her family had, and showing you how a woman with nothing used it to give her daughter something that nobody could take away. Willie Nelson selling a song he couldn't afford to keep and then spending the rest of his life singing it anyway, because the kitchen table it described was the truest thing he'd ever known. Loretta Lynn standing on a stage that hadn't been built for women like her and singing hymns that her people had sung in the dark for generations before anyone put a microphone in front of them. Hank Williams singing I Saw the Light in the same voice he sang everything else, straight, plain, no ornament, because the truth doesn't need decoration. These songs are not about having your life figured out. They are about standing at the edge of what you can manage alone and reaching for something larger. That's what gospel has always been for. Not for the people with clean hands and easy consciences, for the ones who need it. Country music knew that from the beginning. Its people knew that. The farmers and the coal miners and the sharecroppers and the truck drivers and the women holding families together on next to nothing. They knew that the hymns weren't for the comfortable. They were for the ones who were still in the fire and needed to be reminded that the fire doesn't get the last word. And the legends who made this music, the ones who carried it from those little white churches and those kitchen tables and those labor camps out into the world and onto the radio and into living rooms all across this country, they were delivering something that hadn't changed in 1,000 years. The words were older than Nashville. The need was older than country music. And the voice that answered it, when it was George Jones, when it was Dolly Parton, when it was Hank Williams, when it was Johnny Cash in a prison yard singing to men who hadn't heard kindness in years. That voice was the realest thing any of them ever did. More real than any hit. More real than any award. The kind of real that stays with a person for the rest of their life. If you grew up with any of these songs, if your mother hummed them in the kitchen, or your grandfather sang them on the porch on a summer evening, or you heard them come through the radio in a car on a long Sunday drive and they meant something to you then, they still mean it. That's the thing about songs like these. They don't age. Leave a comment below and tell us which one got you. Which song, which singer, which moment in a hymn or a gospel ballad that somebody from this golden era of country music put on a record. Which one is the one you carry with you? Because these songs belong to all of us. Thank you for being here.